So welcome everyone to Psalms for Life, in which we explore Sefer Tehillim, psalm by psalm, with commentary and teachings from Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, as well as our sages and true tzaddikim. And we want to thank Esther Elagorovich for making this shir possible. It's a big undertaking. Week after week, psalm after psalm, and may be a source of merit and bracha and hatzlacha for her family, for everyone here, and for Klal Yisrael, and anyone who enjoys and benefits from sharing the teachings of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. We know his Torah is the Torah of Mashiach. Okay. Psalm 20 is a very powerful and short chapter of Psalms. It is a SEGULA for a few things. And as we discuss the Psalm, there will be some obvious links to the SEGULAs and some not obvious links. It's a SEGULA to heal the sick. Okay, so when someone's sick, we would certainly include this Psalm in our recitation of Tehillim for them. It's a SEGULA for a friend or relative who's in difficulty, who's having a difficult time, going through a hard time. It's a SEGULA for someone, a friend or relative who is ill. Okay, slightly different than a general prayer for someone who's sick. And for a woman in labor. Okay. So basically, this psalm is a plea for Hashem to help. And it's a psalm that is said by Rashi to have been received prophetically / composed by David HaMelech, by King David, while he was waiting for his generals to come back from war. And this is the really sad story of his son Abshalom. Now, David had many sons from several wives. Abshalom was second in line to the throne. Somebody asked what psalm this is. If somebody could type, I'd keep an eye on that for me because I'm not always able to see that. It's Psalm 20. So Abshalom was second in line to the throne after King David. After Amnon, David's son Amnon. And Abshalom was a child of King David and a woman named Maacah, one of David's wives, who was the daughter of King Talmi of Geshur. And she was one of the women that David captured in war. Now, there is a provision in the Torah for women captured in war. This is not a normative Jewish practice, and the sages actually discouraged it, and they instituted, in addition to what the Torah says, they instituted many measures to prevent men from doing this. But what would happen is men would go to war, they'd kill the menfolk, and the women would be left. And sometimes the women were beautiful, and the men wanted to marry them, take them as wives or second wives, etc. This is throughout the world. This is certainly not unique to the ancient Israelites, to our people. And these women had to go through a process that was designed to make them repulsive to the men who captured them, so that the men would not take them as wives. They had to sit in mourning in their captors' homes for a period of time. I honestly don't remember the period of time. I think it's at least 30 days. They weren't allowed to cut their nails. Long nails in the Torah is considered a sign not only of mourning, but a sign of lowness, a spiritual lowness. Short nails are a sign of attractiveness. They weren't allowed to wear makeup, dress up, fix their hair, so on and so forth. And over that period of time, these women, the men would see them without all their finery, without their makeup, without their hair done, without their, the Botox, whatever it was in those days. And they wouldn't be so attracted to them. And they'd say, you know what? It's better that I don't marry these women. And then these women would be set free. However, this didn't work for King David and Abshalom's mother. And they had a son named, and they named him Abshalom. And Abshalom, some of our sages say that he was a retribution from Hashem for King David not having a higher standard and marrying a captive woman. Okay, and this psalm alludes to this a little bit. So what happened is Abshalom, his brother Amnon, is said to have seduced or raped Abshalom's daughter. Okay, this really would have been his half sister. I mean, Abshalom's sister, excuse me. This would have been Amnon's half sister. I'm sorry. The family relationships, you can't even draw a tree. It's more like a family jungle here. And they and Abshalom lured him to a feast and then had him killed. And this was very crushing to David, who knew that Amnon was next in line for the throne, and he was banished. Abshalom was banished for a while from David's presence. And during that time, Abshalom decided that he was going to force David to resign from his throne early, to abdicate early, and that he was going to take over. Now, enter the scene. David is under attack by Abshalom and his army and other armies. It's a big mess, and he's hiding out in Machanaim. And he has to send his generals to war. He has 3 generals that he's going to send to war. And when he's going to send them to war, he chooses Yoav and 2 other generals. And Yoav is going to go after Abshalom. And David says, please don't kill my son. Please don't hurt my son. You can capture him. I understand that, but he's my son. I love him. He's my son. So David also wanted to be the head general, the 4-star general, and lead everyone through this war. And all the people gathered around him and said, listen, you're too precious to us. We can't have you go fight battles anymore. David was a fearless warrior. He said, you can't fight battles anymore. You can't go to war. You're too old and you're too dear to us. And so you have to remain behind. And while he remained behind, he received / prophetically composed this psalm. This is what Rashi tells us. Now, there are other interpretations about when the composition of this psalm took place, but this is the one that most people go by. And what happened was the very famous story of Abshalom. He was on a mule, not a horse, and Abshalom was very, very handsome. He was gorgeous, and he had a long, gorgeous hair, which also a Jewish man is not supposed to have long hair. Okay, it's very specific that he's not supposed to unless he's a Nazir. And Abshalom's hair got caught in the branches of the tree, and that's that famous image from Tanakh that we all have in our heads of the story of Abshalom's hair getting caught in the tree. Yoav, instead of capturing him, I don't know whether he personally slayed him or had someone slay him. Okay, one of his soldiers, one of his footmen. So David hears about this and of course is distraught. But meanwhile, this psalm was the psalm that he said before he sent when he sent his 3 generals out to go to war, and he was sitting behind. Now, there are a few things about this psalm that I also want to share with you in general before we begin with a few of the verses. The first is something from the Tikkuni Zohar. For those of you who don't know, the Tikkuni Zohar is a major Kabbalistic text. And interestingly enough, okay, I want you to keep the number in mind, it's a series of 70 commentaries on the first word of the Torah. Breshit. Gracious, the first word in the beginning. 70 in-depth Kabbalistic commentaries on one word in the Torah. Okay, there are said to be even some say there are hidden books, even on the first letter of the Torah, which is a bit. Okay, so there are 70 commentaries. In one of these commentaries, it's 67, it notes that this psalm has specifically 70 words, which are corresponding to the 70 nations. And each of these words uproots another of the nations. Okay, so let's just talk about that briefly. So there are 70 words in here that have the power to uproot the 70 nations. So the Tikkuni Zohar, which is very concerned with the 70 nations, each chapter of it is a way to uproot the negative spiritual energy of the 70 nations. It says that this psalm is a way to do that, which is why when we go back to the SEGULAs in the beginning, which I'll repeat at the end of the class for you if you missed them, you can see that these are all dealing with potentially negative energies, okay, because not all psalms deal with negative energies, and that this is a way to unroot and untap those negative energies. So we know that we're the one nation, and then there are 70 nations in the world, and each one has their own sar, their own guardian angel, so to speak. We don't, as Jews, we are directly supervised by Hashem. But all the 70 nations have their own sarim, their guardian angels, their own spiritual princes, and so on. And each nation has, they all have actually some good qualities, but each nation has a predominantly negative trait. And saying this psalm is a hint to this idea that we are like a sheep among wolves, and the primary wolves are Yishmael and Esav. Okay, everybody knows who they are. And that those nations rely on their chariots and their horses, and we only rely on Hashem. And when we get to that verse, I'll discuss this more. Okay, so that's the first part of the psalm that I wanted to share with you. Let me find my notes. Okay, now, the other thing about this psalm is that Psalm 19 is said to be the cap-off to the previous, Psalm 20, excuse me, I apologize, is said to be the cap-off to the previous 18 psalms. Wait a second, there are 19 psalms before Psalm 20. So Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 are considered to be one psalm. Okay, we discussed that, I think, in the beginning of this series when we spoke about Psalm 1 and 2. So previous to Psalm 20, there's said to be 18 psalms. And this psalm is said to correspond to the ending of Shmona Esrei. Shmona Esrei means 18. It's the Amidah prayer. And this psalm is said to correspond to that capping off of the Shmona Esrei, in which we take off everything with prayer. We cap off everything with a prayer and sort of a benediction that acknowledges Hashem in general after our 18 individual blessings. Okay, so this psalm has a lot of power. They all do, but this psalm is a psalm that Jews throughout the millennia have said anytime there's any difficulty. So if you are in a pinch, you don't have time to say Tikkun HaKlali. You don't have time to say all the psalms you wish you had time to say. Grab your Sefer Tehillim and say Psalm 20. Okay. Now, some people, myself included, keep little markers in our in our Sefer Tehillim. Mine are color coded, they're a mess. And you can keep little markers in there so that you can access them easily if you want to, as long as the markers themselves don't cover the words. It's important that they don't cover the words. Okay. So also, let me see. Okay, I finished that. All right. There's a lot of information in this short little psalm. So bear with me while I look at my notes. Okay, so the Talmud tells us that this psalm also comes after 19 to sum up and show, after the previous 19 psalms, as well as Psalm 19, to show us that our salvation totally depends on prayer. When we go through the verses of this psalm, you'll see we're saying everything depends on prayer, which makes sense when we go back to the story of why David HaMelech composed this psalm. He was saying, essentially, look, we're out in the middle of war, but all I can do is stay back here. And I know that even though I can't go to war, I can stay back here and I can pray. And that is the answer to everything. And this psalm is a reminder that in truth, before we do anything, any action at all, before we speak, we need to pray. Okay, and of course, this is something that we have to train ourselves to do. It's not necessarily natural to everyone. Okay, let me get my notes, and we're going to start with some verses of this song. Okay, Lamanatzech Mizmor LeDavid, for the conductor, a song of David, and everybody who's been in the previous classes has heard about that opening and what it means. Okay. Ya'ancha Hashem biyom tsara yisagevcha, Shem Elokei Yaakov. May Hashem answer you on the day of your distress, your troubles, your tribulations. May the name of the God of Yaakov make you strong and impregnable, unable to be uprooted. Okay, so the psalm begins with, may Hashem answer you. May Hashem himself answer you. Going back to the 70 nations, they have an angel ruling over them. We go directly to Hashem. And we invoke this psalm, may Hashem answer you directly, without an intermediary, says the Talmud. And it reminds us that we are asking Hashem to answer us on the day of our distress, on the day of our troubles, immediately, not to wait and answer us when we're already worn out. Okay, it's a good psalm to say for this. Okay. So on the day of distress is when the enemies are already gathered against us. And the enemies are gathered against us spiritually. And we know from this class, and I'm sure you've read heard other classes and other commentaries, that we can view Psalms on a variety of levels. And one of the levels is that this is with historicity and the history of King David's life and the life of the other composers of Psalms and what was going on in their lives. And also for us, and perhaps most important, is to view them as our own internal struggles and battles. We all have enemies arrayed against us. Each of us has aspects of those 70 nations inside us, some stronger than others. You got a hot temper, you got an aspect of the 70 nations inside you. You're prone to jealousy, you have an aspect of the 70 nations inside you. Okay, you find it hard to get up and get moving, you're a procrastinator, and others of the 70 nations. So all the midos, all our characteristics that are pulling us away from serving Hashem and from living our lives to our maximum fulfillment, maximum achievement, maximum potential, all of these nations are battling with us at all times inside. We call them collectively the Yetzer Hara, okay, the evil inclination. And so this psalm is basically saying that on the day of distress is the day in which my internal enemies are really trying to take me down. Now, again, we do say this for external difficulties as well. In truth, the internal and the external are one. They're really one. We know from the story of Adam and Chava that the Nachash, the serpent, what used to be outside us, the Yetzer Hara was outside us, tempting us and trying to fool us outside. And then he entered us after the Garden of Eden. So we're really wrestling with that inside. But this expresses often with external enemies as well, because we have battles going on at many, many levels. And this imagery of battles and wars is told to us in order that we should really take this on board personally. People don't necessarily like that imagery anymore. They don't, it's not politically correct to say, I have this negative inclination that's pulling me in a direction. But Judaism demands that we look at this and that we work on it, and that we also accept that we're flawed, but we also accept that we need to work on it. It's an up and down battle. And Rebbe Nachman encourages us to spend time in Hitbodedut every day, and to spend a portion of that time reviewing ourselves, taking a look at ourselves. Where do we need to improve? Okay, what do we need to strengthen? What do we need to maybe reduce? Okay, and it's a sensitive topic. Today, the general ideas is if there's something negative inside, which we all have, everybody does. If you have some negative traits or negative things or negative feelings, that these are to be validated and accepted. And again, Torah is not politically correct. Judaism is not politically correct. That's not what it is. It doesn't say it's okay. It says work on it. Work on reducing these negative influences. You can validate them. Yeah, you have these feelings. They're real. They're real for sure. But now, how can we reduce them? How can we reduce them? How can we even get rid of them? Okay. How can we make them work for us is another possibility, depending what the traits are. All right. So when Israel realizes that they represent Hashem, okay, may the name of the God of Yaakov make you strong. When we realize that the name of Hashem, okay, is going to make us strong, and we realize that we represent Hashem in this world, this changes everything for us. It changes everything. It makes us think twice before we speak, before we do, and so on. Now, we all know that when we see a Jewish name in the paper, and we see a Jewish name in the paper, we see that this Jew has done something good. They won a Nobel Prize, or they're Rabbi of the Year, whatever it is. We feel a sense of pride, because they're a family member, okay, in essence. Okay, but when we see that a Jew has done, the name that always comes to mind, okay, is Bernie Madoff. Sorry, but that's just the name that pops into my head. When we see that a Jew has done something negative, we feel shame that he's a Jew. I don't know enough about the psychology of the nations to know whether other nations have that intense feeling of shame because a member of their nation has done something reprehensible. I kind of doubt it, but I may be wrong. Okay, they'll take pride in the good ones and then just ignore the bad ones. We as Jews know that no matter where a Jew falls on the spectrum, they are a member of Israel. They are maybe a proud member, maybe they're not, okay, but they are our brothers and sisters. And so in this psalm where we say, may the name of Hashem's God make us strong, okay, that's a collective. Okay, we understand that we are all, as they say, I don't know if they still say this, maybe 10 years ago, represented. Okay. All right. Now, I seem to have a problem trying to, if you are on, would you mind making sure you're muted? I keep trying to mute people and they keep unmuting. So thank you. If you're not muted, then every time you shift in your chair, you'll pop up on the screen. Okay. Now, the next verse, Yishlach Ezracha Mekodesh umitzion yisadecha. Okay. So, and there's more to that, but okay. May he send you help from the Kodesh, okay? Umitzion yisadecha. So the Kodesh is the sanctuary, and support you from Tzion. May your help, we know Hashem, again, we don't go through a SAR like the nations do, but may he send your help through the power of the Beit HaMikdash, essentially, and give you support from Zion. In other words, we have these two verses juxtaposed, one about the name of Hashem, name of Yaakov's God, which is our God, okay, it's reminding us who our ancestor is, and may your help come from the Mishkan, in this case, or the Beit HaMikdash after it was built. Okay, so that holiness, that sense of absolute holiness. So what this is saying is when we identify that we belong to Israel, Israel meaning the Jewish people, when we identify that with ourselves, and when we use the name of Hashem, okay, for real, we use it. We don't just say the name of Hashem, but we understand that that name is the name that's going to be a fortress around us. That's when we are able to ask Hashem to send us his help directly from the sanctuary. All right. I am going to skip some verses because we are going to run out of time. And I'm going to go to, let's see. I think we'll go to verse 8, 9, 10. Okay. Start with 8. Ele varechev ve'ele vasusim va'anachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu nazkir. Some through chariots and some through horses, but we, in the name of Hashem, our God, call out. Okay. So what is going on here is David is talking about the battle that he's sitting back from, as I mentioned in the beginning. And he's saying that Hashem is going to answer us and give us victories. But some people, those people over there are going to be relying on their chariots. And those other people over there are going to be relying on their horses. But we, what are we relying on? The name of Hashem and the fact that we can call out this name of Hashem. Okay, this is again, this psalm is perhaps distilled into that verse. Okay, the others, the other nations, look what they're relying on. They're relying on their nuclear weapons. They're relying on their drones. They're relying on their biological weapons. They're relying on their cutthroat terrorism. They're relying on their persuasive propaganda and push for immorality and all these terrible things. But we, in this big giant war that's been going on and will go on until Mashiach conquers everything, we rely on the name of Hashem. That's who we call out for, and that's who helps us. Now, Rebbe Nachman says that when we are making hitbodedut, when we are having personal prayer with Hashem, sometimes we get stuck and we don't know what to say. And it happens. And it happens sometimes to people who are new at it. Some people naturally are able to do it. Some people have a struggle with it. It's different. We're all individuals. We're all our own entire world unto ourselves. And he says when he's stuck, it's also good to just call out to Hashem. And he himself would say, Ribono shel olam. Ribono shel olam, over and over and over and over, or as he would say, Ribono shel olam. Okay, over and over again, master of all the worlds, master of the universe. He would call out to Hashem in a euphemism for a name of Hashem. in order to get help to fight the spiritual battles he needs to fight, that each of us need to fight day after day after day after day. Okay, it's never ending. And we get the energy, we only get the energy when we remember Hashem and remember that we are not relying on anything else except Hashem to help us. Now, I want to briefly pause here in a little bit of an aside to say a discussion. The question came up yesterday and it's slightly relevant to this, so I'm going to go with it. And the idea is how do you know how much hishtadlus or hishtadlut to make versus how much you should rely on Hashem? So the question was a good question. It's often formulated that way, but that's not actually the way we should formulate the question. Not how much action should we take versus how much we should rely on Hashem. We should rely on Hashem 100%. Okay, we are required to take action in the normal course of things. We're required to work. We're required to feed ourselves. We're required to do so on and so forth. We are required to take action. At the same time, all our reliance and trust, all our bitachon must be on Hashem. This is difficult. It's almost two conflicting ideas, but we can train ourselves to think this way, to feel this way, and to have this belief and to act this way. And it's something that we have to remind ourselves 1,000 times a day in order to get in the habit to saying, I'm going to make my hishtadlus. I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to get up. I'm supposed to go to work, but I'm relying on Hashem. And this was said by someone who was overworking. She was discussing this with me. She can't be here today. She was working many, many extra hours each week in order to hopefully make her business successful. And she was getting to the point where it was too much work. And she felt that if she cut back and just worked normal hours, she would lose out. But really, the Torah tells us that you won't lose out. We work hard, but we rely on Hashem and we don't overwork. We have to have time in our life for the important things, which are family, davening, and so forth. Okay. Then we don't rely on the chariots. We don't rely on horses. We rely on Hashem. Then he says, Hema, Karov, V'nafalo, V'anachnu, Kamnu, V'nas Odad. So they slumped and fell down. But what happened? We rose up, revived, invigorated. Okay. They were relying on their chariots and their horses, et cetera, et cetera. But we were relying on the fact that we can call out to Hashem. And we were invigorated. We were revived. Okay. Hashem Hoshia Hamelech Ya'anenu V'yom Karaenu. So it's a very famous verse. Hashem Hoshia. Hashem save us. The king will answer us on the day we call. And this, of course, is not just a literary device of David HaMelech. It's a spiritual device. He says the king will answer us on the day we call. He will answer us. He also, we know from the previous psalm, he has answered, or 2 psalms ago, he has answered us. He will answer us. That is an expression of the absolute emunah and bitachon, the faith and trust that Hashem is going to answer us. When? On the day we call. So how many times have you prayed and nothing's happened? You need to pray more. That's what Rebbe Nachman says. If you're not being answered, if you have a lack, pray more. Don't give up. And sometimes what happens is once you've prayed and prayed again, and you really have prayed with tremendous kavana, tremendous focus and intent, and you felt that connection, sometimes what happens is that you might even shift from what you davened for originally. Okay, Hashem's going to answer you with new thoughts and new ideas about what you truly need. All right, so that's just a little taste of this short but very beautiful Psalm 20. And now we are going to say Psalm 20 and the Psalms of the day. And I'm going to give you the segulot for all of them. The SEGULA is for all of them. So let me just stop this recording.